The hardest words I ever heard from my own son were not shouted in anger. They were spoken quietly, on a day that was supposed to celebrate the bond between a father and his child. My name is Richard Whitmore, and I never imagined that Father's Day would become the day I questioned everything I believed about family. For most of my life, being a father was the greatest responsibility and honor I ever had. I did not always have the easiest path, but I always believed that showing up mattered more than anything else. After my wife passed away, my world changed in ways I never expected. Suddenly, I was not only a grieving husband, but also a single father trying to raise my son, Daniel, the best way I knew how. I remember those early years clearly. There were nights when I came home exhausted from work, but I still made time to help him with homework, prepare dinner, and listen to every story about his day. I wanted him to know that no matter what happened, he would always have someone standing beside him. I never expected anything in return. That was simply what fathers do. They give because they love. They sacrifice because their children matter. As the years passed, Daniel grew into a successful adult. I watched him build his own life, and I felt proud every time I saw the man he was becoming. Like many parents, I knew there would be moments when children created their own paths and became more independent. I accepted that. I never wanted to control his life. I only wanted him to know that my door would always be open. But over time, I noticed a distance growing between us. It happened slowly. At first, it was just fewer phone calls and shorter conversations. Then holidays became more complicated. Visits became less frequent. I told myself it was normal. Adults become busy. Life changes. Families go through seasons. I try not to take it personally. I believe that love could remain strong even when people were not as close as they once were. Then came Father's Day. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I made coffee, looked through old photographs, and thought about all the years Daniel and I had shared. I remembered his first steps, his first day of school, and all the small moments that only a parent remembers. I had prepared a small gift for him. Nothing expensive, just something meaningful that reminded me of our journey together. I thought maybe this day could be a chance for us to reconnect. I thought maybe we could sit together, share a meal, and remember the good times. When Daniel arrived, I immediately noticed something was different. He seemed distant. There was no warmth in his voice. No smile like the one I remembered from years ago. I tried to make the moment comfortable. I asked about his life, his work, and how things had been going. But his answers were short. There was a heaviness in the room that I could not explain. Finally, after a few quiet moments, Daniel looked at me and said something I never expected to hear. "I wish you had never been my dad." For a moment, I felt like time had stopped. I looked at him, hoping I had misunderstood. After everything we had been through, after every sacrifice and every memory we shared, those words felt impossible to accept. But Daniel was not finished. He reached for his phone and said he needed to make a call. I watched as he stepped away, and within moments, I realized he was calling the police. I sat there quietly, trying to understand how a day that was supposed to honor fathers had become the moment my own son pushed me away. I did not know what had brought us to that point. I did not know what Daniel believed had happened. But I knew one thing. The story between a father and son is never just about one painful moment. There is always a history behind it. There are memories, choices, misunderstandings, and emotions that build over many years. And as I sat there waiting for what would happen next, I wondered how the son I raised could look at me and see someone he no longer wanted in his life. After Daniel walked away with his phone in his hand, I remained sitting in the same chair where I had spent so many years sharing meals, conversations, and memories with him. The house felt strangely quiet. The same walls that had witnessed birthdays, holidays, and ordinary family moments now held a memory I never expected to create. I kept asking myself one question: how had we reached this point? I knew there had to be more to the story than one painful sentence spoken on one difficult afternoon. A relationship between a father and son does not disappear overnight. It changes slowly, through years of conversations, choices, and emotions that are sometimes left unspoken. While I waited to understand what would happen next, my mind returned to the years when Daniel was young. I remembered the little boy who used to run through the front door after school and tell me every detail about his day. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle, helping him prepare for important moments, and encouraging him whenever he doubted himself. Those memories were not just pictures in my mind. They were pieces of my life that I had treasured. When his mother passed away, I promised myself that I would do everything I could to give Daniel stability. I knew losing a parent at a young age could leave a lasting mark, and I wanted him to feel supported. There were many nights when I wondered if I was doing enough. I worked extra hours when necessary. I learned how to handle responsibilities I had never expected to manage alone. I made decisions based on what I believed was best for him, even when those decisions were difficult. I never wanted Daniel to feel like he had lost both parents. I wanted him to know he still had a family. As Daniel grew older, I watched him become his own person. I was proud when he graduated, found his career path, and started building a future. I understood that children eventually create lives separate from their parents. I never expected him to call every day or spend every weekend with me. I only hoped we would always have respect and honesty between us. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At first, I thought it was simply adulthood. Daniel became busier. His responsibilities increased. His conversations became shorter. I told myself not to worry. I reminded myself that every parent experiences distance as children grow. But looking back now, I realized there were signs I ignored. There were moments when Daniel seemed frustrated with me, but would not explain why. There were times when I asked if everything was okay, and he would simply say that he was fine. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I never imagined he was carrying resentment that he had never shared. After the situation on Father's Day, I spent a long time thinking about those years. I wondered if there were moments when Daniel felt unheard. I wondered if there were things he believed about me that were not true. The hardest part was not the call to the police. The hardest part was realizing my son had reached a point where he felt he could not come to me and talk. That hurt more than any accusation. When the officers arrived, I remained calm and respectful. I knew that reacting emotionally would not help anyone understand what had happened. I simply explained that Daniel was my son and that I wanted to understand why he felt the way he did. I did not want to fight against him. I wanted to know what was happening inside his heart. Later that evening, after everything settled down, I sat alone in my living room surrounded by memories of a lifetime. I looked at old photographs and wondered when my son stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as someone he needed to distance himself from. I knew there was a missing piece of this story. There was something Daniel believed that had brought him to this moment. And I knew that before I could repair anything, I first had to understand what had caused my son to feel this way. Because even after everything that happened, one truth remained. He was still my son, and I was still his father. The days after Father's Day felt different from any other time in my life. I had experienced difficult moments before, but this felt different because the pain came from someone I had spent decades protecting. When a stranger misunderstands you, it hurts. But when your own child believes something about you that is not true, the pain reaches a much deeper place. Still, I reminded myself that Daniel was not always the person standing in front of me that day. He was once the little boy who held my hand while walking through a crowded store. He was once the child who looked at me like I could solve any problem in the world. Somewhere along the way, something had changed, and I needed to understand why. A few days later, Daniel agreed to talk with me. I did not know what to expect. Part of me was hopeful that we could finally have an honest conversation. Another part of me was afraid of hearing something that would hurt even more. When we sat across from each other, I noticed that he looked tired. He was no longer angry like he had been on Father's Day. Instead, he looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. I started by telling him that I did not want to argue. I did not want to prove that I was right and he was wrong. I simply wanted to understand. I wanted to know what had brought us to that moment. For a while, Daniel remained quiet. Then he began explaining things from his perspective. He told me that over the years, he had felt like I did not understand him. He said there were moments when he believed I cared more about my own expectations than his feelings. Hearing those words was difficult because they did not match the father I believed I had been. But I listened. I had learned that sometimes people need to feel heard before they are ready to hear your side. Daniel continued talking about memories I remembered differently. He described moments when he felt disappointed, moments when he thought I was judging him, and moments when he believed I was not supporting his choices. As he spoke, I realized something important. We were not only dealing with what happened recently. We were dealing with years of emotions that had never been fully discussed. The painful truth was that Daniel had been building his own version of our story for a long time. And because we had not talked openly enough, that version had become stronger in his mind. I told him that I was sorry for the moments when he felt alone. I never wanted him to believe that he had to carry those feelings by himself. But I also explained that there were things he did not know. There were sacrifices I made quietly because I never wanted him to feel responsible for my struggles. There were decisions I made because I believed they would help him, even if he did not understand them at the time. I had always thought that being a good father meant providing stability, guidance, and protection. I did not realize that sometimes children need more than actions. Sometimes they need conversations. They need to hear the reasons behind those actions. They need to know what is in their parents' heart. As we continued talking, I saw a small change in Daniel's expression. For the first time, he seemed to consider that there might be another side to the story. He did not suddenly forget everything that had happened, and I did not expect him to. Healing does not happen in one conversation. But something important happened that day. We stopped being two people defending our own memories and started becoming two people trying to understand each other. Before Daniel left, he looked at me and said something I had not heard from him in a long time. He said he needed time to think about everything. It was not an apology yet. It was not a complete solution. But it was the first sign that maybe the distance between us was not impossible to cross. After he left, I sat quietly and thought about how fragile family relationships can become when people stop talking. Love can remain even when people are hurt. Sometimes it simply gets buried under years of misunderstandings. And I knew that if there was any chance of finding our way back to each other, we would have to uncover the truth beneath all the pain. After my conversation with Daniel, I spent many evenings thinking about everything he had said. I found myself going back through years of memories, not to prove that I was right, but to understand how two people who loved each other could end up feeling so far apart. I realized something that was difficult to accept. Love alone does not always prevent misunderstandings. Sometimes, even the strongest relationships need honest conversations, and sometimes silence can create a distance that neither person intended. For years, I believed that my actions spoke clearly. I thought Daniel would understand why I worked long hours, why I made certain choices, and why I tried so hard to create stability for him. But I began to see that a child does not always see the sacrifices behind a parent's decisions. They only see the moments that directly affect them. That realization did not erase my pain, but it helped me understand where Daniel's feelings came from. A few weeks later, I found an old box in the closet that contained memories from when Daniel was young. Inside were school drawings, birthday cards, and photographs from years that seemed to pass faster than I ever expected. I sat on the floor looking through those items and remembered a version of my son who trusted me completely. I remembered the boy who would ask me questions about everything, the teenager who wanted advice about his future, and the young man who once told me that I was the person he admired most. Those memories reminded me that the relationship we had was real. It was not defined only by the painful moment on Father's Day. There was still a foundation beneath everything that had happened. Around that time, I received a message from Daniel asking if we could talk again. I agreed immediately. When we met, the conversation felt different from the first one. There was less defensiveness and more willingness to listen. Daniel admitted that he had spent a long time holding on to certain feelings without explaining them to me. He said that instead of talking, he allowed those feelings to grow. I appreciated his honesty because I knew admitting that was not easy. I told him that I also had things I wished I had done differently. I explained that I spent so much time trying to protect him that I sometimes forgot he needed to know what I was feeling too. I wanted to be the strong father who always had answers, but maybe I should have shown him more of my own struggles. Maybe I should have allowed him to understand that parents are human too. As we talked, Daniel shared something that surprised me. He told me that part of his anger came from believing that I had never truly understood his life. He felt that I was always trying to guide him instead of simply listening. I thought about that carefully. A parent's instinct is often to protect, but sometimes protection can feel like pressure to a child. Even when our intentions come from love, the way we communicate matters. That conversation did not solve everything immediately. There were still years of hurt that could not disappear in one afternoon. But something changed. For the first time in a long time, Daniel and I were not speaking from a place of anger. We were speaking as two people who wanted to understand each other. Later that evening, I walked through my house and looked at the same rooms where I had raised my son. I thought about how many memories existed in those walls. The laughter, the challenges, the celebrations, and even the difficult moments were all part of our story. I realized that families are not built because people never hurt each other. Families are built because people are willing to find their way back after they do. I still carried the sadness of what happened on Father's Day. I would never pretend that those words did not hurt. But I also knew that holding on to anger would only create more distance between us. I had spent my life teaching Daniel about forgiveness, patience, and responsibility. Now I had the chance to show him those lessons through my own actions. The road ahead would not be simple. Trust takes time to rebuild, and some wounds need patience before they heal. But for the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt hope, because even after the most painful words, a father's love can still leave the door open. After Daniel and I started talking again, I realized that rebuilding a relationship requires more than a single conversation. It requires patience, honesty, and the willingness to look at painful moments from a different perspective. For years, I had believed that being a good father meant always having the right answers. I thought providing a stable home, working hard, and making sacrifices were the clearest ways to show love. But I began to understand that love is not only about what we do for people. It is also about making sure they know why we do those things. Sometimes the heart can be in the right place, but the message can still be misunderstood. During that time, I started writing down memories from my life with Daniel. I did not write them because I wanted to prove anything to him. I wrote them because I wanted to remember the journey we shared. I wrote about the small moments that shaped us, the challenges we overcame, and the times when we were closer than we had been in years. As I looked back, I realized that every family has moments that are complicated. No relationship is perfect. There are things people say that they regret and things they wish they had explained sooner. What matters is whether people are willing to face those moments with honesty. A few days later, Daniel came to my house again. This time, there was no tension between us. He looked around the living room where he had spent so much of his childhood and smiled. He pointed at an old photograph on the shelf and remembered a family trip we took when he was young. For the first time in a long time, we were talking about memories instead of disagreements. That moment meant more to me than he probably realized. Then Daniel asked me a question that surprised me. He asked, "Dad, why did you never tell me how difficult those years were for you?" I thought about his question for a moment. The truth was that I never wanted him to carry my burdens. When he was growing up, I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to believe that everything would be okay. I thought hiding my struggles was part of protecting him, but I realized that maybe I had hidden too much. Maybe by trying to always appear strong, I had accidentally created distance between us. I told him about the challenges I faced after losing his mother. I explained how difficult it was to make decisions alone and how often I wondered if I was doing enough. I told him that there were many nights when I felt uncertain, but I kept moving forward because he needed me. Daniel listened quietly. He told me that he never knew those details. He said that from his perspective, I always seemed confident and certain. He thought I never struggled because I never showed him my worries. Hearing that helped me understand something important. Sometimes the people closest to us only know the parts of our story that we choose to share. They do not always see the battles we face privately. That day, we both learned something about each other. Daniel learned that my decisions came from love, even when they were not always communicated perfectly. I learned that my son had been carrying feelings I never knew existed. We were finally seeing each other as two people, not just as a father and son trapped in old memories. Over the next few weeks, we continued rebuilding our connection through small moments. We shared meals together. We talked more often. We asked questions instead of making assumptions. It was not about pretending the past never happened. It was about accepting that the past could teach us something. I still remembered the pain of hearing Daniel say those words on Father's Day. A moment like that does not disappear completely. But I also understood that one painful day should not erase a lifetime of love. As fathers and children, we sometimes forget that we are both learning how to navigate life. Parents make mistakes. Children make mistakes. The difference is whether we choose pride or understanding afterward. Looking back, I realized that the call to the police was not the end of our story. It was the moment that forced us to finally confront the distance between us. It brought hidden feelings into the open and gave us a chance to rebuild something stronger. I never wanted a perfect son. I only wanted my son to know that he was loved. And slowly, through patience and honest conversations, Daniel was beginning to understand that the love of a father does not disappear just because a relationship goes through a difficult season. After Daniel and I began rebuilding our relationship, I noticed that something important had changed between us. We were no longer trying to prove who was right or who was wrong. Instead, we were finally trying to understand each other. For a father and son who had spent months carrying hurt and confusion, that small change meant everything. But I also knew that healing required more than conversations. Trust is not rebuilt through promises alone. It is rebuilt through consistent actions, through showing up, and through proving that the relationship is worth protecting. During that period, I started noticing little moments that reminded me of the son I knew before everything became complicated. Daniel began calling more often. Sometimes it was only for a few minutes, just to ask how my day was going. Other times, we would talk about memories from years ago and laugh about things we had almost forgotten. Those simple conversations meant more to me than any grand gesture could have. They showed me that the connection between us was still there. It had not disappeared. It had only been covered by years of things we never said. One afternoon, Daniel visited me and brought a box from his home. Inside were some old belongings from his childhood. He told me he had found them while organizing his things and wanted to share them with me. We sat together looking through old photographs, school projects, and small reminders of the life we had built together. At one point, Daniel held up a picture of the two of us from when he was young. He smiled and said, "I remember that day. You were always there." Hearing those words touched me deeply because they reminded me that somewhere beneath the pain, Daniel still remembered the love we shared. He had not forgotten everything. He had simply allowed certain painful memories to become louder than the good ones. As we continued talking, Daniel finally shared something he had never told me before. He admitted that for years, he had compared his life to other people's families. He saw fathers who expressed themselves differently and wondered why our relationship did not look the same. He believed that because I was not always openly emotional, I did not care as deeply as other fathers. I listened carefully because I understood that feelings are real, even when they are based on misunderstandings. I explained to him that every person shows love differently. Some people express love through words. Others show it through actions. I had always been the kind of person who fixed problems, provided support, and made sure the people I loved had what they needed. I never realized that Daniel sometimes needed to hear those feelings spoken aloud. That conversation changed the way I looked at my role as a father. I had spent so much of my life trying to protect Daniel. From difficulties that I forgot, he also needed to see the person behind the responsibility. He needed to know that his father was not just a provider or a protector. He was also a person with fears, hopes, and emotions. Daniel apologized for some of the things he had said on Father's Day. He admitted that calling the police had been a decision made from a place of confusion and frustration. He said he wished he had asked questions before allowing his emotions to guide him. I appreciated his apology, but more importantly, I appreciated that he was willing to reflect. That showed me maturity. It showed me that my son was not defined by his worst moment. None of us should be. I told Daniel that forgiveness does not mean pretending something never happened. The words he said hurt me, and I would always remember that day. But forgiveness meant choosing not to let that pain control our future. It meant making room for understanding. In the months that followed, our relationship continued to grow stronger. We created new memories instead of only looking back at old ones. We spent time together without feeling the need to avoid difficult conversations. We learned that being family does not mean never having disagreements. It means caring enough to find your way back. Looking back now, I realize that the hardest moments in life sometimes reveal what truly matters. That painful Father's Day showed me how fragile a relationship can become when people stop communicating. But it also showed me something else. Love that is built over a lifetime can survive difficult seasons when both people are willing to choose patience over pride. Daniel and I were not trying to return to the past. We were building something new, something stronger, based on honesty and understanding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not losing my son. I was finally getting to know him again. The weeks after Daniel and I began reconnecting felt different from anything I had experienced before. There was still a part of me that remembered the pain of Father's Day, the moment when I heard words I never expected from my own son. But there was another part of me that understood something important. If we wanted to move forward, we could not spend every day looking back at the moment that broke us. We had to focus on the moments that could help rebuild us. For the first time in a long while, Daniel and I started creating new memories instead of only revisiting old ones. One Saturday morning, He invited me to join him for breakfast at a small diner we used to visit when he was younger. It was a simple place with comfortable booths, familiar coffee cups, and the same friendly atmosphere I remembered. As we sat there, I noticed something that meant more to me than he probably realized. Daniel was no longer sitting across from me like someone trying to defend himself. He was sitting there like my son. We talked about ordinary things. We talked about his work, my garden, old neighbors, and funny moments from his childhood. Those simple conversations reminded me that family connections are often repaired through small, consistent moments rather than one dramatic event. During breakfast, Daniel became quiet for a moment. He looked down at his coffee and said something that stayed with me. He told me that after everything happened, he spent a lot of time thinking about the kind of son he wanted to be. He said he realized that he had spent so much time focusing on what he believed I had done wrong that he forgot to remember everything I had done right. Hearing that was emotional, but I did not want him to feel like he had to carry guilt forever. I told him that the most important thing was that we were finally being honest with each other. I did not need him to punish himself for the past. I needed him to understand it and learn from it. I wanted my son to grow, not live with regret. Later that month, Daniel asked if he could help me with some projects around the house. It was something small, but it reminded me of the years when he was young and wanted to help with everything I did. We spent the afternoon working together, talking about life, and laughing about memories we had not discussed in years. At one point, Daniel looked around the house and said he never realized how much history existed there. He said every room reminded him of something from his childhood. I smiled because I knew exactly what he meant. A home is not just made of walls and furniture. It is made of moments. It is made of the people who shared their lives inside it. That afternoon, Daniel asked me a question that surprised me. He asked if I had ever considered giving up on our relationship after what happened. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told him there were moments when I felt deeply hurt. There were moments when I wondered if things would ever feel normal again. But I never stopped loving him. A parent does not simply stop caring because they are hurt. The connection between a father and child is built over a lifetime. It can become damaged, but that does not mean it disappears. Daniel became emotional when he heard that. He told me he had spent months believing that I did not understand him, but he never considered how much his actions had affected me. That was the moment I realized we were finally seeing each other clearly. Not as an angry son and a wounded father, but as two people who had both made mistakes and both wanted something better. Over time, our relationship became stronger because we stopped pretending that difficult moments did not exist. We learned to talk about uncomfortable things. We learned to ask questions before making assumptions. We learned that love is not proven by never having problems. Love is proven by the willingness to work through them. Looking back, I still remember the pain of that Father's Day. I still remember sitting there, hearing words that changed the way I saw my relationship with my son. But I also remember what came afterward. I remember the conversations, the understanding, and the effort from both sides. Sometimes the greatest test of a family is not whether they face hardship. Every family does. The true test is whether they are willing to find their way back after being hurt. Daniel and I were no longer trying to repair the past. We were building a future that was more honest than the one we had before. As time passed, I began to understand that rebuilding my relationship with Daniel was not about returning to the way things were before. Life does not work that way. Once people experience hurt, they cannot simply erase those moments and pretend nothing happened. Instead, they have to decide what they want to do with those experiences. They can allow pain to create more distance, or they can use it as a reason to grow closer and understand each other better. Daniel and I chose the second path. We were learning how to become father and son again, but this time with more honesty and openness than before. One of the biggest changes was that we started talking about things we had avoided for years. Before, we often assumed we knew what the other person was thinking. I believed Daniel understood my intentions. Daniel believed I understood his feelings. The truth was that we were both wrong. We loved each other, but we were not always communicating in a way that allowed that love to be felt. One evening, Daniel came over for dinner. As we sat at the table, I noticed how different the atmosphere felt compared to that painful Father's Day. There was no anger between us. There was no need to defend ourselves. We simply enjoyed being together. After dinner, Daniel helped me clean up, something he had not done in years. It was a small gesture, but to me, it represented something much bigger. It showed that he was not just saying he wanted to rebuild our relationship. He was making an effort. While we were in the kitchen, Daniel asked me about his mother. He wanted to hear stories about her that he was too young to remember. We spent hours talking about the past, sharing memories that had been hidden away for a long time. I realized that grief had affected both of us in different ways. When we lost her, I focused on being strong for Daniel. But I never considered that he was also trying to understand a loss he was too young to fully process. That conversation helped us see each other differently. We were no longer only talking about the disagreement that separated us. We were talking about the experiences that shaped us. Daniel later told me that one of the hardest parts for him was realizing that he had judged my silence as a lack of love. He said he used to think that because I did not always express my emotions openly, I must not have felt them deeply. But after our conversations, he understood that my love had always been there. It was simply shown in different ways. I told him that I also learned something important. I learned that being a father does not mean always appearing strong. Sometimes being a good parent means being honest about your feelings and allowing your child to understand you as a person. For many years, I thought protecting Daniel meant keeping my struggles hidden. Now I understood that sharing parts of my journey could actually bring us closer. Months after everything happened, Daniel and I created a new tradition. Every Sunday morning, we would meet for breakfast at the same diner where we first started reconnecting. We would talk about our week, discuss plans, and sometimes just sit quietly together. Those mornings became something I looked forward to more than anything. They reminded me that relationships are built one moment at a time, not through grand promises, but through consistency and care. I still carried the memory of the day when Daniel called the police on me. That moment would always be part of our story, but it was no longer the only thing that defined our relationship. It became a reminder of how important communication and understanding truly are. Sometimes people hurt each other not because they stop loving one another, but because they stop understanding one another. Daniel and I had spent years looking at the same story from completely different perspectives. Once we finally sat down and listened, we discovered that the love between us had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for both of us to find our way back. As I watched my son continue to grow and change, I realized something that gave me peace. A family is not measured by whether it faces difficult moments. Every family does. A family is measured by the willingness to repair what was broken and choose love again. And after everything we had been through, I knew Daniel and I were stronger because we had learned how to do exactly that. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized that the most important part of my journey was not the painful moment that almost separated my son and me. It was what came after. It was the choice we both made to listen, to understand, and to rebuild something that we thought might be lost forever. Life rarely gives us the chance to rewrite difficult moments, but it does give us the opportunity to decide what those moments will mean. For Daniel and me, that painful day became a turning point. It showed us that even strong family relationships can become fragile when people stop sharing their feelings. It also showed us that love can survive when people are willing to be honest. As the months passed, I noticed changes in Daniel that reminded me of the son I had always hoped he would become. He became more thoughtful, more patient, and more willing to talk about things that once felt uncomfortable. But I also saw changes in myself. I learned that being a father was not only about providing answers. It was also about being willing to listen. For many years, I believed my responsibility was to protect Daniel from every hardship. I wanted to carry the difficult parts of life so he would not have to. But I learned that sometimes sharing our struggles helps the people we love understand us better. A family is not built by perfect people. It is built by people who are willing to keep choosing each other despite imperfections. 1 year after that painful Father's Day, Daniel came to my house with a small gift. When he handed it to me, I smiled because I remembered the gift I had prepared for him on the day everything changed. This time, there was no anger, no distance, and no misunderstanding between us. There was simply a father and a son sitting together. Before I opened the gift, Daniel looked at me and said something I will never forget. He told me that he was grateful I never stopped leaving the door open for him. He said that when he was hurt and confused, he pushed me away, but I continued to believe that our relationship was worth saving. I told him that was what fathers do. They do not stop loving their children because of one difficult moment. They continue hoping, even when things are painful. That does not mean they ignore their own feelings or pretend everything is fine. It means they understand that love and forgiveness can exist together. As I opened the gift, I realized it was not the item inside that mattered. It was the meaning behind it. It represented a second chance, a new beginning, and a reminder that our story was not defined by our worst day. It was defined by everything we chose to do afterward. I often think about the little boy Daniel used to be and the man he has become. I am proud of both. I am proud of the child who once looked at me with complete trust, and I am proud of the adult who found the courage to admit his mistakes and rebuild our relationship. I also think about the father I was and the father I continue to become. I made mistakes. I could have communicated better. I could have shared more of my feelings. But I never stopped loving my son. That was the one thing that never changed. Today, when I look back on that difficult chapter, I no longer see it only as a moment of heartbreak. I see it as the moment that forced us to finally understand each other. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from the moments we wish had never happened. Sometimes the relationships that are tested the most become the ones we value the most. Daniel and I did not find our way back because we forgot what happened. We found our way back because we faced it together. A father's love is not measured by a perfect relationship. It is measured by patience, compassion, and the willingness to stand beside the people we love through every season of life. And after everything we experienced, I know one thing for certain. I did not lose my son on that Father's Day. Instead, we found each other again.